Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 4, chapter entitled, London, a Dream Fulfilled. There are some gurus who go around making out. This is George Harrison speaking about Srila Prabhupada and why he loves Srila Prabhupada and wanted to help Srila Prabhupada. There are some gurus who go around making out that they are it. But Prabhupada was saying, I am the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, which is really what it is, you know. He wasn't saying, I am the greatest and I am God and all that. With him, it was only in the context of being a servant, and I like that a lot. I think it's part of the spiritual thing. The more they know, then the more they actually know that they are the servant. And the less they know, the more they think that they are actually God's gift to mankind. So George Harrison, amongst all of the Beatles, John Lennon was very philosophical, and especially when communicating with Guru Das, he would ask very deep questions, and he would listen to the answers. Paul McCartney was a family man. He had his family, so he wasn't so active in the interactions between Prabhupada and the devotees. And Ringo Starr also, he had his own life. So amongst the four Beatles, George Harrison was the most devoted and the one who really went out of his way to help Srila Prabhupada and the devotees get settled and start the society in London. So although he was obviously a very powerful individual, very spiritually advanced, he always retained that humbleness. And I think that is one of the most important things, because you learn, more than all the words he says, you learn really from the example of how he lives and what he does. So George Harrison, he didn't know Sanskrit. He didn't know the word acharya. Acharya means one who teaches by example, by one's achar and vichar. But here he understood and he expressed in English, in the most humble of ways, the superior mentality of Srila Prabhupada of humility. The more you know, the more humble you become, because you understand that you're a servant of Krishna. So Prabhupada, although he didn't make all the arrangements, he sent his disciples, and because he had trained his disciples so nicely, his disciples had arranged so many programs for Prabhupada, hundreds of people, both from the British community and from the Indian community. They were all coming, obviously, to hear from Srila Prabhupada. And George Harrison was one of those people. Although he was fabulously wealthy, world famous, he still submitted himself to Srila Prabhupada as a spiritual teacher and learned from him about Krishna. The Daily Sketch, that's one of the big papers in London, reported, Krishna people dine out at John and Yoko's place. A photograph showed the devotees seating out of doors, taking prasadam. Lunchtime at Tittenhurst Park, stately home of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and some of the Lennon's house guests take their places in yesterday's sunshine. So, in London, when the sun shines, it gets into the newspapers. Because every day, when Prabhupada finally arrived, and he started taking his morning walks, there would always be a morning drizzle. They'd have to hold an umbrella over him. He'd have to wear a heavy coat and he'd have to wear gummy boots. That means boots up to your knees so that he wouldn't get himself all wet. He'd have to, around his dhoti, he'd have to tie it wasn't a chador. Someone had nipped a blanket from an airlines, and Prabhupada used that blanket to cover himself. So here the sun shone one day, and John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and the devotees, they decided to have a picnic out in the garden to celebrate the sun. And it made it in the newspapers that, look, John Lennon's having a picnic with the Hare Krishnas. The picnickers are followers of the Indian Swami, His Divine Grace, Abhay Charan Bhaktivedanta. They have adopted the ways of the East, from their clothes and shaven heads, right down to the Indian curry they eat with their fingers, which is all rather out of character for a place like Tittenhurst Park, which cost John Lennon 150,000 English pounds, UK sterling, and covers 60 acres of most exclusive sunning hill near Royal Ascot Racecourse. So, as we heard last week, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And George and John both, they were so amazed that anytime they would go to see the devotees, there would always be prasadam for them. And not just a little bit, full meals. And we had pictures of so many preparations they would make for them. Where do you get that? There are 160 acres, there's no restaurants around, there's no pubs or anything like that. But the devotees were there, and they always had wonderful prasadam. And whenever there was an opportunity, they would be feeding John and George and all of their friends. Prabhupada, just a minute. Prabhupada and his people, and John and Yoko and theirs, made an odd combination. 2 days after Prabhupada's arrival at Tittenhurst, John and Yoko had flown to Canada to perform with the Plastic Ono Band at Toronto's Rock and Roll Revival at Varsity Stadium. In October, John and Yoko had recorded Wedding Album and begun work on a film, Rock and Roll Circus. And John, I don't know if we can get this last, had recorded Cold Turkey. Who knows what cold turkey means? Cold turkey is an expression that people who are addicted to heroin and opium, when they want to give up their addiction, there are different ways to do that, to give up addictions. You can very gradually give it up, reduce your dose, or you can go cold turkey. And cold turkey means you just stop. And when you do cold turkey, your body and your mind undergoes severe withdrawal reactions. You shake, you can't think properly. It's a medical condition. So his latest, because unfortunately, along with, just like with the Devatas, they have their somaras. Somaras, when they drink the intoxication of somaras, they become free from their sinful activities. But here on the earthly planet, wealthy people who live like demigods, or on a lower level, of course, they also become intoxicated because they have so much wealth and they use their wealth for breaking all the principles. When they take intoxication, they increase their sinful activities. So because of all the wealth they had accumulated, some of the Beatles had become addicted to heroin. For instance, one of the Beatles, I won't mention his name, he had so much heroin in his blood that they wouldn't allow him to go into America because they knew that, I mean, if you're a heroin addict, you're going to have to keep taking heroin when you go in the country. So because he had a lot of money, he got a transfusion. He replaced all of his blood so that they couldn't, when they did a test, they couldn't find any heroin in his blood. So this is the extent of heroin addicts, what they'll do. So here was the latest song called Cold Turkey, and John wanted Prabhupada to hear his latest song. Although John was usually shy, the devotees working at the main house found him open-hearted and generous with his possessions. He invited the devotees to stay permanently at Tittenhurst and farm. Whatever he had, he said, he would share with them. So yes, he was very philosophical, and that was when he would hold conversations with Guru Das and Shamsundar and Mukunda. He had genuine spiritual questions about life, about the purpose of life, about God, about Krishna, and he was affectionate with the devotees. That's why he allowed them to stay in his estate. First it was a business transaction that they would do maintenance work, repair work, and he would give them free boarding. But later it became a spiritual relationship. There was always prasadam. He could come and see Prabhupada whenever he chose to. He had the devotees to ask his questions. And in that way, they found John to be a very accommodating person. One day, Yoko asked Jamuna if a devotee couple could stand in for her and John on stage at a London theater. She and John had previously appeared there dressed in only a burlap bag and were supposed to make another appearance. But Yoko thought perhaps a devotee couple could take their place. The crowd, she said, might never know the difference, and even if they did, it would be a hilarious publicity stunt for the devotees. Politely declining, Jamuna explained why devotees could never do such a thing. When she told Prabhupada, he was adamant. None of his disciples would go. For days afterwards, he condemned this sensuality. So what they would do is when they would be, naturally, because they were very famous, and they were a married couple, when they were invited to programs, they had this huge white bubble, and they would go inside of the bubble, and no one could see them in the bubble, but they knew that when that bubble appeared somewhere, it was John Lennon and Yoko Ono inside of the bubble. So Yoko, she just decided one day, well, if no one knows who's in there, then why don't we just ask the devotees to take their place? We don't want to go to this program. But Prabhupada was adamant. No, you can't take part in this sensuality. Even when they had their very first big program, it was like when they first came to London, just as we read about in San Francisco, there was a meeting of the tribes when 100,000 hippies from all over America came to San Francisco, to Golden Gate Parkway. And of course, the devotees were there chanting and dancing. So the British youth wanted to do the same thing in London. And they invited the devotees. They said that everyone had to maintain complete silence. All the different groups were coming, even the Hell's Angels came with their big motorcycles, but anyone who entered into the big hall had to maintain complete silence. So Guru Das explained to them that silence means chanting Hare Krishna. So everyone else was silent, but what the devotees did was they went to the different aisles, and they stood at the very top of the aisle. And when everyone was in complete silence, all of a sudden, they started a rip-roaring kirtan, and a devotee came down from each aisle, to get everyone to get up and chant and dance with them. And Yoko Ono and John Lennon, they were there. They walked in their bubble, and they also took part in the program. So this is how the devotees were able to intermingle and expose Krishna consciousness to a completely new place that before had never heard about Krishna. John invited Prabhupada to the manor to hear his recent recording of Cold Turkey. Although such a song held little interest for Prabhupada, John whimsically wanted him to hear it. Taking the opportunity to preach to the great man of the world, Prabhupada went. Within John's main sitting room, Prabhupada sat on the couch before the fireplace. The tape was ready on the large 16-track machine that had recorded it. And as Prabhupada sat patiently, John began to work the controls. But the machine wouldn't play. John began cursing under his breath, turning knobs and pushing buttons. Although only Purushottam had accompanied Prabhupada, 2 other devotees hid outside beneath the windows listening. When they peeked in and saw John struggling with the machine, they began giggling in the shadows. Wasn't Krishna's plan. Oh, Prabhupada said, so your machine is not working. Well, never mind. We have also made some recording, and we would like to play this music for your pleasure. John resigned himself to listening to Prabhupada singing, and Prabhupada was saved from cold turkey. Prabhupada kept his visit short. As he was leaving, he saw on the wall, framed, life-size photos, life-size, that means that big, of John and Yoko naked. He also saw black and white silhouettes of a man and woman in various positions of sexual intercourse. On returning to his room, he commented, "It is not good for us to continue staying here." He asked Mukunda to find him an apartment in London. So Srila Prabhupada, he was willing to compromise to a particular point. But when, after seeing these most inappropriate photos in the home of the owner of the estate, he then came to the conclusion, we must leave here immediately. We do not belong here because of the incompatibility of their lifestyles. The devotees were following the 4 regulative principles, and their hosts were obviously not interested in the 4 principles. The very place is where the new temple was going to be, a 5-story building, a brownstone. Renovations were still incomplete, and Prabhupada said he preferred to be in the city so that he could oversee the work. The natural setting of Tittenhurst was pleasant, but Prabhupada's host's way of life and his were incompatible. So you can imagine, there were only a handful of devotees. The 6 devotees had come from America. They had gathered a few young boys and girls who were interested in Krishna consciousness. No one yet had been initiated. They were all waiting for Prabhupada to initiate them. And Shyam Sundar, he would stay at Berry Place, and another devotee named Tirthapad, and whatever boys were available, because they had to work for John Lennon to do the gardening and the repair work of his buildings. Whoever was available would come and help Shyam Sundar with this 5-story building. And they didn't have Prabhupada's quarters ready yet, so where was Prabhupada going to stay? One day, John and Yoko, dressed in black, came to visit Prabhupada. Acknowledging him to be a great yogi with mystic power, They asked him to use his powers to arrange with Krishna that they be reunited after death. Prabhupada was disappointed. "This is not my business," he said. "Krishna provides you with life, and he takes it away in the form of death. It is impossible that you can be united after death. When you go back to home, back to Godhead, you can be united with Krishna. But husband and wife, this is simply a mundane relationship. It ends with the body at the time of death. You cannot pick up this kind of relationship again after death." So Srila Prabhupada was speaking to them what they had to hear, because their lifestyle was not spiritual, not religious, and therefore there was no telling where they were going to go at the time of death because of not following the four principles. When the husband and wife are both devoted to Krishna, we read many instances in the Srimad Bhagavatam that they can go back to Godhead in Vaikuntha and serve Krishna together there. And you also have instances of devotees who eternally remain as husband and wife, just as Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda, Vasudeva, Devaki. They remain as husband and wife because their whole relationship of marriage is based on service to Krishna. So those who remain devoted, everyone who goes back to Godhead, they're eternally related in service in the spiritual world. They're husbands and wives, but not in a mundane marital relationship. Because of past sinful activities, there's no telling where they'll go at the time of death. Therefore, if really they wanted to remain as husband and wife, they could become pure devotees of Krishna and then go back to Godhead together. But what they desired was that they simply be reunited after death, and Prabhupada said, "That's not my business." At one end of the estate lived a bricklayer and his wife in a small, neglected Georgian house. Hired by John to build a recording studio on the property, the bricklayer had only recently moved to Tittenhurst. A tough, burly man, he never spoke to the devotees until one day he asked several of them if they believed in ghosts. "Oh yes," Kulashekar said. "Prabhupada says there are ghosts." "I don't believe," the bricklayer said. "My wife is having dreams, but I don't believe in ghosts." The bricklayer's wife revealed that both she and her husband had been hearing something at night. Last night they had gone running to John Lennon's house, terrified, complaining of sounds, chains rattling, boot heels pounding, and the noise of something like a body being dragged across the floor. The bricklayer had seen his wife violently shaken by the shoulders, although no one else was there. So ghosts, we know that ghosts exist. A ghost is an unfortunate living entity whose gross material body has been destroyed, but they still have their subtle body of mind, intelligence, and false ego. Sometimes one becomes a ghost by committing suicide. That's why suicide is very much discouraged in spiritual life. Because when one does not have a gross material body, with one's mind and intelligence and false ego, one may still have material desires. And without a gross body to fulfill those desires, those ghosts will enter into another body, overtake that body, and fulfill their desires by controlling that other person's body. So it's a very dangerous situation. And these ghosts are the followers of Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva, he takes compassion upon them. And when a man and a woman are engaged in illicit sex at inauspicious times, such as during eclipse or during the dusk or dawn, Lord Shiva, as he's traveling with his followers, he places these ghostly living entities into the wombs of these husband and wife who are having illicit sex. So it's very, very, very difficult situation to get out of. Lord Shiva, he's very kind by giving them another birth, but it's nothing that any devotee would ever aspire for. We use our body, our mind, our intelligence, everything in the service of Krishna. And unfortunate living entities, such as the ghosts who were living in this house, they didn't have the opportunity to get another birth. So therefore, they create trouble. And that's why the woman, she was being shaken by these ghosts, although neither the husband or wife could see the ghosts. When the devotees told Prabhupada, he said, "You tell John Lennon that if he wants, we can get rid of these ghosts." Mukunda relayed the message, but John had already invited his friend, a white witch, to come and exorcise the ghost. White witches are called warlocks. The warlock visited the bricklayer's cottage, and a few devotees tagged along. Over the fireplace in the main room, they found a carving of a person with the ghost coming out of his forehead. And on the opposite wall, mahogany runes. "These are ancient witch runes," the warlock said, shaking his head. "I can't do anything here." So we've heard about witches. They're called pichachis and hobgoblins and jinns. All these followers of Lord Shiva, he's so merciful to those who are in a very inauspicious type of body. They do exist, and they do give trouble to the embodied living entities such as ourselves. And there are different types of black magic and different types of sciences that we don't study, of witchcraft, whereby you can call these different living entities, send them away, control them. And just as we have our tilak and we have our different devotional signals such as the chakra and the shankha and the padma and the club, so they have their insignia also, and they are called witches' runes. You can look it up. I mean, the information is there, but devotees aren't interested. But all of this does exist, and the devotees now were coming face to face with witches, with warlocks, with ghosts, and we'll see what Prabhupada does about it. When John asked the devotees to try their method, Prabhupada directed them. At the bricklayer's cottage, they should sprinkle water offered to Krishna in the doorways, blow conch shells, and then have kirtan. A group of devotees went, and Kulashekar led the kirtan. After half an hour of chanting, Kulashekar felt a great release of pressure within the room, and the kirtan became ecstatic. The devotees returned to their engagements, assuring John that the ghost would not return, and the bricklayer and his wife moved in again. So we have quite a few books. Of course, this is Satsvarup Das Goswami's Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, from which information from so many different devotees was accumulated by interviews. And then Satsvarup Maharaj had to read all of the interviews and get a synopsis of what actually happened in each one of these episodes. But then we have the books by Mukunda Das Goswami, that's Miracle on 2nd Avenue. We have Tamal Krishna Maharaj's book called Servant of the Servant. We have Guru Das's book called By His Example. We have Shyam Sundar's book called Chasing Rhinos with the Swami, Shyam Sundar, Guru Das, Mukunda. And we have the memoirs of other devotees. So each one of these devotees will describe this in a slightly different manner. Some say that it was Prabhupada leading the kirtan. Here, according to the different interviews, Satsvarup Maharaj has concluded that it was Kulashekar leading the kirtan. The point is, water offered to the Supreme Lord at the doorways, blowing of conch shells, and an ecstatic kirtan. That's how to get rid of ghosts. The next morning, Prabhupada passed the old cottage on his walk. "So, how is the ghost?" he asked. "No news, Prabhupada," Kulashekar replied. The following morning, Prabhupada again asked, "How is the ghost? Would they like to have him back?" Years ago in India, Prabhupada said when he was running his chemical business, he had detected ghosts in the building at night. "What did you do?" one of the devotees asked. "I simply chanted Hare Krishna, and the ghosts would go away." Prabhupada then opened his eyes wide and gestured with both hands, mimicking the frightened workers in the plant who had come running to him. "Babuji, Babuji, there is a ghost." "There is a ghost." The devotees laughed. Actually, Prabhupada said, there are many ghosts here, especially over by the stable areas. Stables means where the horses are kept. They had horses and they had a donkey also. Those are the stables. They are attached to this place, but they will not harm you if you just chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada was anxious to leave Tittenhurst, and by late October, some of the devotees had moved to Berry Place. Prabhupada no longer had any business at Tittenhurst. Mr. Lennon was an influential person who had seemed interested in Krishna, but now there was no point in Prabhupada staying on at the estate. Yoko and her ex-husband, Dan, now John's manager, were also pressing John to be rid of the devotees. Dan complained that the devotees were trying to take over the place. The devotees, on the other hand, complained to John that Dan and Yoko were misrepresenting them. On one side were Dan and Yoko. Yoko was John Lennon's wife. On the other side, the devotees. John was in the middle. He had to choose. John told Mukunda that as far as he was concerned, he got along fine with the devotees, but the people around him were having difficulty. He would give the devotees a couple more weeks to move to their new temple in the city. The devotees were already in the process of moving to Berry Place, and Mukunda had found an apartment for Prabhupada a short drive from the temple. In a few days, everything would be ready for Prabhupada to move. On the day Prabhupada left Tittenhurst, he stopped at his car and said, "I want to say goodbye to a few friends first." He then took a last walk through the grounds, giving careful attention to the trees, sometimes touching their leaves, just as on his morning walks. Then he left. The next day, a severe storm swept through the Tittenhurst estate, breaking windows and uprooting trees. November 3rd, 1969. Prabhupada moved into his furnished apartment on Baker Street, a 10-minute drive from the very place temple. After 2 months in London, he was anxious to see his temple open, and Shamsundar was working hard, although progressing slowly. For the temple's interior, Shamsundar had an artistic concept taken from photographs he had seen of the Ajanta caves, South Indian temples with walls and ceilings of carved stone. So this is a picture of one of the rooms or temples in the Ajanta caves. And you can notice the ceiling. Now this is just almost exactly the way Shamsundar was making the ceiling of the new temple. His inspiration was to produce a similar effect using California redwood he and Mukunda had shipped to England a year ago. On first hearing the plans, Prabhupada had asked, "Why make it so artistic?" But Shamsundar had been so set on the idea that Prabhupada had permitted him. With the ceiling partly finished, there was no turning back. So many months ago, we had read about the redwoods of San Francisco. Some of these trees are thousands of years old. They're so big, they're so gigantic that you can make a tunnel and drive cars through them. Unless you see them yourself, you can't believe how big they are. So when these trees die, unless someone illegally cuts them down, they are taken and they're floated into the ocean. And the logs of the trees, they'll float down the ocean. This is the Pacific Ocean, where San Francisco is. And these dried up redwoods, the big logs, would come onto the shore, the beaches. And many of these otherwise wood, we know how expensive wood can be, and especially hardwood, like these thousands of years old wood. So Shamsundar and Mukunda, they arranged that they would get a huge quantity of this wood, either the driftwood that they found on the beaches. I don't know exactly which wood it was, but a year before they had planned, when Prabhupada asked them to prepare to go to London, they had shipped all of this wood with the intention of making the temple. And now Shamsundar, according to his artistic capacity and his inspiration, was doing exactly that all over the walls, the ceiling, the floors. It was going to be absolutely beautiful. Here we have a sample. These are the redwood walls that Shamsundar made, and this is the ceiling that Shamsundar made. You see the similarity between the Ajanta caves and Shamsundar's design. Shamsundar toiled day and night, yet each day the temple design seemed to grow more elaborate, with the walls and floor fashioned of solid redwood, and the ceiling lined with redwood arches. Shamsundar took great care to see that each piece fit exactly into place. As Shamsundar inched along, devotees joked that the room looked like an upside-down boat. But Prabhupada encouraged him, telling him it was very beautiful. A similar thing happened in 26 Second Avenue. Although it was a sparse, it used to be just a shop, a store. Suddenly one day the devotees got inspired. They brought rugs, they brought flower vases, they brought a carpet, they brought so many things, and they surprised Prabhupada with their artistic attempts to render devotional service. And Prabhupada encouraged them that this inspiration is coming from Krishna. He didn't stop them from trying to use their creative inspiration in Krishna's service. So although the devotees were ridiculing, let's say, not criticizing, looked like an upside down boat, and it was taking so long, and it was getting more and more elaborate every day. Prabhupada didn't stop Shyam Sundar. He let him go on. Prabhupada often allowed his disciples to work as they liked. He reasoned that they were raising the money and could spend it in Krishna's service as they pleased. The money was coming primarily from the record that the Apple records, George Harrison, the Beatles Corporation had made. And they were selling thousands of records for the devotees, Apple Records. And they were getting the proceeds. So that money was being used for the temple. He also did not care to interfere in every detail of a disciple's service, especially when that disciple was strong-headed and had ideas that were not harmful or obstructive. All Prabhupada's disciples were ultimately under his absolute decision, but he was often lenient, 80% lenient, he would sometimes say. So sometimes Prabhupada would give exact, very, very distinct orders what to be done. For instance, when the first Rath Yatra carts were made, the first big ones, he specifically told them, you have to make the wheels out of wood. And the devotees heard him, but they thought they had a better idea. They made it out of iron spokes. And what happened was the weight of the wooden Rath Yatra carts was so heavy that the iron spokes just completely crushed into squares. And they could hardly even move the carts as it was coming along on Rath Yatra. So Prabhupada gave the direction, he gave the instruction, the devotees didn't follow it, and therefore there was calamity. So he knew that Shyam Sundar was a very qualified, very artistic person, and he trusted Shyam Sundar enough that he felt that let Shyam Sundar do it the way he feels it should be done. 80% lenient. Could someone tell me when it's 5:30 so that I know when to stop? Oh, clock is there. Okay, thank you. Shyam Sundar particularly thrived on having his own big projects. He had arranged for the mantra rock dance in San Francisco, built the first Rath Yatra carts, established a friendship with George Harrison, and now he was designing a temple. Prabhupada allowed it, watchfully, like a father. Consulting the Vedic calendar, Prabhupada chose December 14th for the temple opening celebration. And despite predictions from Shyam Sundar and others that the deadline would be impossible to meet, Prabhupada ordered invitations printed immediately. So we had a similar situation here in Vrindavan, where Prabhupada, he wanted it open on Janmashtami of 1974. Guru Das, who was also present, being our temple president, he assured Prabhupada, yes, Prabhupada, it'll be ready, everything is fine, everything's great. And then Prabhupada came and found out that the temple wasn't ready. So then Prabhupada, it was a temporary disappointment, but Prabhupada overcame it. Fortunately, no invitations had been sent except amongst the devotees. And he rescheduled it for the next auspicious date, 8 months later, Ram Navami, 1975. And another time, when Prabhupada did fall ill in 1976, Prabhupada, one of his life's promise was to Sri Radha Rasa Bihari in Bombay, that he would build them a temple. And he knew that he was going to be going back to Godhead soon. And he implored Surabi, the architect of both our Vrindavan and our Bombay temple, at that time he was working on Bombay day and night, to please get the temple finished before he left this world. But Surabi insisted, of course, no one knew when Prabhupada was going to disappear, but Surabi said, no, it's not possible. We can't get the temple ready in time when Prabhupada was deathly ill here. So unfortunately, the temple, although Prabhupada wanted to do it during his lifetime, he left this world November 14th, 1977, and the temple construction in Bombay was not complete until Makar Sankranti of January 1978. So that's when the temple was opened. So Prabhupada, he gave leniency to his disciples, but when he saw that something had to be done at a particular auspicious time, then he took charge. And this is one of those instances where Prabhupada got the invitations printed December 14th, although Shyam Sundar said that it wasn't going to be possible. The devotees had tremendous work to do and little time. Not only did they have the temple to complete, but also Prabhupada's quarters on the second floor and the kitchen in the basement. Faced with their tight deadline, they worked harder. As Prabhupada was anxious about the temple opening, he was also anxious about publishing the first volume of Krishna, but he had no money. So these two aspects of Krishna consciousness always go like two tracks, the Bhagavad-Gita and the Pancharatriki Vidhi. So yes, Prabhupada was encouraging and supporting the opening of the temple, but at the same time, he wanted his books to be printed. So the order of the spiritual masters, the train, and the two tracks are the Pancharatriki Vidhi and the Bhagavad-Gita. So Bhagavad-Gita was Prabhupada's books. Temple was getting open, but he still wanted his books to get printed. And where was that money going to come from? According to printers' estimates, the book would cost about $19,000 US. Prabhupada told Shyam Sundar to ask his friend George for a donation. Shyam Sundar, who had always been careful not to ask George for money, was hesitant. But Prabhupada insisted, and Shyam Sundar gave in. George agreed, but regretted it afterwards. Then Shyam Sundar began to feel sorry. After all, he hadn't really wanted to ask George, and George hadn't really wanted to be asked. When Prabhupada heard of this, he invited George to see him. George told Prabhupada that every day people were asking him for his money. But when Prabhupada explained the importance of the Krishna book and how George's donation would be devotional service to Krishna, George dismissed his regrets. He also agreed to write a foreword to the volume. So this is the handwritten portion of the foreword that was in the beginning of the original Krishna books that Prabhupada printed, where George Harrison writes, "All you need is love, Krishna," with his signature and the address of his apple core. All right, so there's much more to go into, but we have the next class, so we'll stop here, and we'll continue next week with Srila Prabhupada and George speaking together. Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,